There's power in your name that saved us all. So much power.
Welcome to Women Encouraging Women. We are kicking off our 2022 year with a different focus. Same thing, we're sharing our God stories of how God has met us in the circumstances of our life, and that's what we did last year when Erica and I were interviewing the different women, and this year we're going to continue with that thread, but focusing on the fact that He was there with us and He's still here now with us. So just a reminder, because often we forget of how He is there in the midst of the hard time, and I think the enemy uses that. So through these stories that we'll be sharing this year, we'll be remembering how God was there in the midst of that time and how He's still here now. So today's guest that we're going to kick off with is Jewel Gerlach. And you may recognize her because she works here, and she actually has been here since she was a baby. So she's been here for a while, so you might recognize her or her parents. Jewel is a single mom with 2 kiddos. You want to tell us a little bit about your kiddos?
Yeah, I have a son who is 5 and he's attending Lambs right now, and I also have a daughter who is 4 and she is in Calvary Preschool.
So we are, I'm excited to hear Jewel's story and her share it with you guys, because I did hear bits and pieces of it before, and it's just so beautiful to see how God redeems our past and uses it for His glory. So Jewel, can you tell us, briefly give us a picture of what was going on in this season of your life before you share the challenging time?
So I was definitely in a season of selfishness and living for myself and what the world said was the right thing to be doing. And at the time I was in Arizona, and I was in a very toxic environment and I was with a very abusive boyfriend at the time. And I had my son at the time. He was about 7 months, I would say. And we did lots of moving around and lots of hostile words. So, that's the biggest picture I can paint without going into long detail.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me you were living for yourself at that time, and that was where and why you ended up where you were.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about this challenging time that you want to share with us.
So I guess the time I would like to share is how I was saved, I guess you would say, and how I returned home from that situation. Is at the time I wasn't living with them, but my boyfriend's sister's fiance ended up taking his life, and that was a really large eye opener for me, thinking not that I was suicidal, but that could be me, because he was living in this environment way longer than I was. And then my brother's fiance at the time invited me to their wedding, so that was like my ticket and his excuse to let me go home. So then it's just been a redemptive journey since then, and I've struggled along the way, and it was hard even when I came home to accept the fact that I was home and not there, because change was a hard thing for me then.
Wow, so could you tell us a little bit, you said, so you weren't allowed to go, you said you needed an excuse.
Yeah, at the time, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere without him, and I did separate from him a couple times, but then toxic things would happen once I returned, because he was the father of my kids, so I thought I had to be with him, and that is just so not true. So
Right. So tell us what happened after this. You went home.
And the wedding, and unfortunately he did move here for about 5 months, but then he had to go home, which was a praise, and he hasn't been back since. But I had a friend along the way that never gave up on me. She started in my childhood and still continues to be my best friend to this day. And she encouraged me to go to Study and Share, and I always had that feeling of fear coming back to the church of knowing who I was, like the hometown fear that we're learning about in Mark. But the Lord showed me that there's a different group of people that I was meant to be at church. So, and then through study and share, he showed me I was living out of head knowledge, not heart knowledge. And so it's been a journey of the Lord coming into my heart instead of just knowing who he is in my head. So
Wow, wow. So that time span was what?
I would say probably a year and a half since I came home, which was 2017. So
Wow,
yeah.
that's amazing. What made you want to come back after trying your own way? Because you said you were living for yourself. What made you say, I'm done with living for myself?
I think the consistency that God showed me, because I never was like, I don't believe in God. Like, I always kept my faith throughout it all. And I think there's different things he did to me that showed me, hey, I'm still here and I'm still working for you. And seeing it in other people's lives, and the fact that people were willing to put their faith in my life and encourage me, really made me see that I was living the wrong way. So I think that was the biggest switch. And we did the Revelation. We were learning Revelation at the time and study and share, and that was so amazing too, and definitely a huge factor for me. So
Wow, wow. So do you remember, you have a specific time where you would say God was in the midst of that?
I mean, other than the fact of getting me home, I would say when I did come home, I was on and off smoking cigarettes for like 10 years. And I finally decided I need to stop. And I had tried to stop, obviously, before. This time I prayed, and I've been cigarette free since that. And I knew that that was the Lord, because I didn't even have any, addiction problems with it, and I haven't since. So I definitely, that to me was one of the biggest things, and one of the things I go back to when I feel like I don't see God in my life. That's one of the ones that I'm like, yeah, that was him, not me. So
Yeah, I mean, and that is so true, that a lot of times we have these things that happen to us to remind us. Throughout the Bible, you hear remember constantly, to remember those things, so that in the midst now we have that to hold on to, that God was helping me through that. God was there. God opened doors here. Who are some of the people? You said your friend. Did you have other people that were there with you to help you? Because a lot of times when we hear and we remember these stories, it's so important to remember the community that God has put us in. So are there any other people? You said your friend.
yeah, I mean, well, my parents, we still had that, father, mother, daughter relationship. So there was still that, like, a little bit of, I don't know, like feistiness in me with that. But no, I did end up going to a counselor, and she's a Christian counselor, and she changed my life. So yeah, she was one of the biggest, and still is. I still see her things. And then my friend, and obviously community working in Calvary. I mean, there's not one person here that I could say that I couldn't go to. I feel like and share a little bit and get encouraged. So
What would you say you would want to walk away with and share with our listeners? What is one thing you want them to walk away with?
I want them to know that no matter what darkness you're walking through, no matter what shame you feel or guilt or feeling of a lost identity, that Christ is there. And I can say that looking back on my past and knowing everything I've done and everything I've felt, that he's there and he's waiting. It might be through fellowship. Like, for me, that's what brought me back. So don't ever feel like you're too far gone, because I've been there, and trust me, you're not.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And that reminds me, I was just reading the story of the prodigal son, and I was in tears reading it again. It's a common story, but just reading that part of the Father dropping everything and running to the Son is it's so beautiful, and such a beautiful reminder, because he does that with all of us no matter what our past is, because we're sinners, and he's showing us his grace. But even with you, like, you actually went back home.
Yeah.
You actually you went back home, and you received that grace through your parents, through others, and obviously through God. So it's just a beautiful reminder there that you have in your own story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joel, for sharing. And next month we will have another guest. You can stop by and listen in. Bye.